and it is not prepared to give them up. And therefore the Bolivarian project of unity, of the unity of South America against its imperial neighbor, remains extremely important. I remember when we were discussing Telesur, of setting up Telesur, and I was talking to the Comandante, and I said, I had come up with a name for this new television station, and I said, why don't we call it Al Bolivar? And he said, it's a funny idea, but let me explain two things to you. One, it would exclude Brazil. And we have to include Brazil. We have to, it's crucial for us. And secondly, he said, and at that time this was of course accurate, he said, of course, Al Jazeera's coverage is amazing. We watch it and are amazed that this coverage is going out, but that could change any minute because the Emir of Qatar uses the station to hit his rivals in Saudi Arabia and here, there, and everywhere, and we don't care about that at the moment. But I don't want to be like that. If we have a television channel like Telesur, it should serve the whole continent. If there are right-wing governments which carry out atrocities, of course we will report them. But the aim of the channel is not going to be to just go wildly against everyone and become very sectarian. And I must say he was absolutely right on that. Absolutely right on that. So he was one of those people who had a rare vision, which is what the Cuban leaders who met him early on liked very much about him, and felt that this was a leader made of solid timber, oak, that he couldn't be felled easily. And he would carry on the tradition, the old tradition from Simon Bolivar onwards, of liberating the continent. Because Bolivar has said, we try, we are defeated, we try again, we are defeated, we carry on, we don't stop. And the leaders who take his name in South America do that. Who would have thought that Cuba's isolation in South America would be broken in this way? Not me. And that Cuba would be treated as when the Comandante was alive, every time he had doubts, this is not a big secret, he would hop on a plane and go and have a long conversation with Fidel. Why? Just to see his lovely face? No. To discuss politics, to discuss strategy. That's why when Evo Morales was elected president in Bolivia, he did the same thing. Rafael Correa did the same thing. It's young, new politicians going to talk to the grand old man of South American politics and asking his advice on what to do. And often Fidel advised them, don't go beyond what can be achieved. We did that in South America, and it was not a happy experience. Reached him over the seas was a copy of a French radical newspaper in which it was reported that the French radicals, as the barricades went up again in 1830, were singing a song to celebrate their triumph. And one verse of that song went like this: America, by which they meant South America, America to cheer us, looks on us from afar. Her fire ring of republics was lit by Bolivar. And that impact which South America had in the early years of the 19th century, not different, though the world is very different, of the impact that Chavez and the Bolivarian republics had on the world in which we live. After all, why is it that this hatred for him fostered in the Western media? I say hatred because it's despicable what they've written about him, and they should be ashamed of themselves. If you look at the cover of when Chavez died in The Economist, they had his picture with Thatcher and saying, of course, one of these people was good. We agree with that. And quite gratuitously, I was reading the Financial Times a few weeks ago, not so long ago, and suddenly there was an editorial saying the world is a better place without Chavez. Well, I mean, if you go on like this, then one does begin to wonder what you are. Are you journalists still? What role are you playing in today's world? And I'll tell you, this has been a huge problem for us. Bolivar mercifully did not have to deal with all this. We do in this world. That systematically, the mainstream press in the Western world, with the partial exception of The Guardian, because their correspondents in Venezuela have been gusanos. They allow some space. They allow some space in their op-ed pages for a different view to be put, unlike Le Monde, or unlike Republica, or unlike the New York Times, or unlike the television stations, which give completely biased reports and reporting generally from that region, and particularly against Venezuela. Why Venezuela? Because it's the richest oil producer in that hemisphere. And that wealth that comes from oil is being used to transform the country, and they don't like it. Because, of course, similar things could be happening in other parts of the world aren't, because we're told it's not possible. And the Bolivarians show that it is possible. The other, there was a Venezuelan analyst ages ago, I can't remember, 2004 or 2005, described Hugo Chavez to a foreign historian, not particularly friendly, who was visiting to see what was going on in Venezuela. And he said, I can describe, and he was not friendly, he said, I can describe Hugo Chavez and this whole thing to you in a following sentence. Chavez is strategically obsessive but tactically pragmatic. Quite accurate. I agree with that. And he was not alone, but this applied also to Bolivar. He could be very tactical. But strategically, he had absolutely no doubt what needed to be done to liberate the continent. It could also be applied to another person far removed from South America, Lenin. Very, very tactical, pragmatic tactically, but strategically obsessive. So what are these strategic obsessions of Bolivarianism today? They're very straightforward. A country in which the majority of people benefit, i.e., not a country in which a small group of people make large amounts of money. And that change has been slow, and everyone knows it's been slow. But the attempt that has been made has already transformed the country. Numbers of people educated, the numbers of people out. Elementary things, yes, but in this world in which we live, ultra-radical. Can't be tried anywhere else in the world. The second strategic aim, and that is to transform the living conditions for the bulk of the poor. Educate everyone. Give rights back to the indigenous people. Stop the institutionalized racism that has existed in these countries for a long, long time, and Venezuela in this regard was particularly unpleasant. They want to change all that. The second big strategic aim is, of course, to drive the United States out of the continent. Now, how can anyone in their right mind regard that as a reactionary? The fact is, it's not easy. And it's not easy because the United States is a huge empire. It governs, tries to govern the world in a particular way. It's different from the European empires who used to directly conquer countries and then stay there. The Americans don't like staying on, probably because they don't like facing what they've done every single day. Yeah. It could be that, but it probably is much deeper reason than that. And they rule indirectly, they always have, in every continent. Found people who will rule for them. And then guard and protect these people and their economic interests. So all this notion, which became popular, that the Americans are on the verge of collapse, that the American empire is in decline, let me tell you this is not true economically, despite the crises. There have been many crises before in the history of the United States and Western Europe. And there can be no last crisis unless there's a political alternative. However deep the crisis, they will pull out of it because there's no alternative, no political alternative, no social alternative. And this is why the Bolivarian project is very radical. Because it says we don't care what you're doing, we don't care how you think you want to run the world, we're not going to run our world that way, and that is why they're determined to get rid of these regimes. Have no doubt about that. What we are witnessing in Venezuela today is part and parcel of a destabilization which the United States and its intelligence agencies and sections of the State Department have been carrying out now for decades. So why are people surprised? Because imperialism has added a tiny little addition to its normal demand, which is that it favors human rights. And this demand for human rights has just become a stick to beat countries they don't like with. We never hear of the demand for human rights in Saudi Arabia. We never hear about the demand for human rights in countries which they are close to. And then they say that basically we are worried democracy in these countries is not being properly implemented. So what should these countries do? I mean, can anyone deny that Venezuela has a thriving opposition? That it has a large private press which attacks the government day in and day out and has had that since Chavez came to power and the Bolivarians came to power? Just imagine a press like that in this country. That half the press of this country attacks the government day in and day out, what would they do? Ask yourself that. I mean, only today, 3 judges have said that what these special intelligence networks did at the airport to stop a journalist carrying information, holding him for 9 hours, is legal. Well, I don't want that sort of democracy to infect South America. The Ecuadorians gave asylum very courageously to Julian Assange because the democratic world wants to bundle him out and probably send him off to the United States as soon as they can. Snowden learned from that experience and got out in time. These are people who are making, what is their crime? They are making information available which we need as citizens in a democratic country to know about so we can act on it. This is no longer regarded as necessary. We are told quite casually now that the National Security Agency in the United States has the right